The next topic is going to be PNS. I'll say that slower, PNS. The topic was given to me earlier this week, and so I want to just kind of throw out some thoughts. I didn't put together a slide deck, but I want to talk to you a little bit about the reasons for doing it, the efficacy of it, the safety, all those kind of things. So when it comes down to it, this is an FDA-cleared procedure that is a non-invasive or minimally invasive neuromodulation therapy that targets specific nerves. And so you can imagine that there's a lot of pain conditions out there that are tied to a specific nerve. So what kind of indications do we have? I think the number one indication in my practice is probably complex regional pain syndrome. We get a lot of those referrals for the wrist and hand, for the foot and ankle. Home run. People that have had post-surgical changes like total knee arthroplasty, people like that. What about that stubborn hip pain that people cannot quite figure out exactly where it's coming from? It's kind of on the posterior hip, kind of over the iliac crest, maybe going the lateral hip a little bit. That cluneal nerve distribution, the superior cluneal nerve distribution. Those are very good indications of this. And when you have a true cluneal neuropathy, nothing else I found works, except for maybe a block and it's temporary. What about patients that have problems with the headaches and the craniofacial problems? Those are also good indications. What about the tibial nerve, the sural nerve? Some of my best results are on people that have cubital tunnel syndrome. I have a guy coming up that I'm going to do in a couple weeks that has bilateral cubital tunnel, and he has peripheral neuropathy. So I'm going to put a stimulator in his back to cover his back and legs. He unfortunately was in a coma as a result of a pancreatic necrosing pancreatitis, and now he's got peripheral neuropathy like out the wazoo. So I'm going to do peripheral stim here, spinal stim for the legs and feet. So those are good indications. What about patients that are not responding well to pain medications, right? We've talked about gabapentin, we talked about Lyrica, all these other medications. What do you do after that for peripheral neuropathy? There's a whole lot of people in my area who advertise in the newspaper a lot, which is the number one sign that you should be careful about all these cures they have for neuropathy, which basically comes down to lasers and all those other things. And our patients have tried everything. And so by the time they get to us with peripheral neuropathy, they've already been on gabapentin, on Lyrica, probably narcotic. They've probably been to some chiropractor. No offense, chiropractors are good people, but sometimes they offer some things that may be a little out there. And so they've tried all these things, and they come to you and they're looking for another answer. And so I've had a really good success rate with those. There's some clinical outcome studies that show reduction in pain up to 70 to 80%. Improvements in sleep, mobility, functional living, reduced reliance on opiates, just like with any kind of stimulator. And the nice thing is that the patients are very satisfied and they're kind of involved in their own care. So instead of reaching for that pill, in most instances, we have Nalu here, and there's other companies out there that have other devices that have to be applied to use the device, but it doesn't involve implanting a battery, which is nice. So when it comes to the safety of these placements, there are very few things you're going to do today or in your practices that are less difficult. I don't want to say easy because you're not supposed to say that, but less difficult because all you're really having to do a trial is place a lead along a nerve. So first step, decide what nerve you're trying to affect, right? If I want to affect the tibial nerve, I'm going to put it in my code for a mononeuropathy of the tibial nerve, and I'm going to go and put a lead right along the tibial nerve to affect foot and ankle pain. If I'm trying to affect the ulnar nerve, I name that nerve. If it's the superior cluneal nerve for the lateral hip, I'm going to name that nerve. If it's the SI joint, the middle cluneal nerve does a good job of covering that. We'll get into SI joint later with fusions and everything, but there's not a lot you can do with SI long-term anymore, and so this is another option for that. There's minimal damage to the tissue. We're talking about little small tissue punctures for the trial, tinting of the skin, putting it along the nerve. These are done either with ultrasound guidance or fluoroscopy, depending on the person you're doing it with and their skill set. Real low complication rates. When it comes to spinal cord stimulators, I was talking to a patient today, and this may be the first I've ever heard of this, but they got an epidural hematoma when somebody was removing the leads. During the procedure, not anytime during the trial. They came in the office, they pulled the leads out, and they got an epidural hematoma, and they subsequently had to have an evacuation surgically, a big scar. I was like, holy cow. Made me think twice about how hard I pull those leads out, right? If it feels a little tension, you don't want to yank on it. You want to give it just a little, that's just a little Stevensism. But there's no chance if you're not putting anything in the spine of having an epidural hematoma. What's the number one infectious problem with spinal cord stimulators we put in? It's the battery pocket infectious. Well, these don't have a battery pocket to speak of that degree to get infected. So we're not worried about getting, if we're not placing in the spine, we're not worried about getting CSF leaks, we're not worried about hematomas. Really the risk is very low. This has been covered by lots of different insurances. It's getting more and more approval. We're seeing that some of these are done for patients that can't get approval for a spinal cord stimulator. But when it comes in to the person who comes in and they say, my back, and then I hurt all the way down my legs, I'm going to probably put a spinal cord stimulator in that. But if they come in and say, man, below my knees, really just about halfway down my tibia, down to my foot, I have this paresthesia, I have this pain I can't deal with, that's a person I'm probably going to talk about doing a peripheral stim on. So as you're thinking about how do you differentiate your practice from other pain doctors, we talked about this last night, kind of the Alaska practice. One of the ways to differentiate your practice from other people, and I'm going to talk about this a lot today, and I'm going to talk about with hydrocision also, is do things that the other people in the area don't do, right? I showed you the radio frequency ablation. Everybody on my boulevard does that. Everybody does. And maybe I do hips, knees, and shoulders that they don't do, but everybody does the axial skeleton, but that's how I differentiate myself. Another thing you can use to differentiate yourself is to do the extremities with the stimulators. Another thing you can do to differentiate yourself is to do the tendon procedures we're going to talk about later. So this has been a real good way for me to attract extremity patients from like podiatry cases that went bad. This has been a good way for me to attract the hand surgeons to refer me people on hand cases that went bad. CRPS, again, is a fantastic way to help patients out. Think about being a podiatrist or orthopedic surgeon who did a surgery exactly right. They did it step by step, exactly like they're supposed to, and the patient develops CRPS. They send that person to you, and because they are out of things to try, and you put a little lead in them, and they come back to that surgeon, they say, man, all it took was that referral to that pain doctor. They put a lead in, and my pain is gone. That is a great way for you to build practices in between other specialties. And what we're going to talk about a lot today is how do you integrate, we spent time last night with a spine surgeon. Yes, they're people too. And so we can get along with each other, we can collaborate, work together. So I think this is another great way to get involved. There's some emerging other options. There's a lot going on in the urgency and incontinence world. I don't know, is Nalu diving into any of that at all?
No.
Not yet. I heard about a little dime-shaped thing that you can place into the extremity and get urinary continence help with. I haven't seen that personally yet. There's some thoughts about sleep apnea, asthma, stroke. There's different things they're looking into. There's two kinds of differentiation companies, though, I want to kind of put out there. One is Nalu and Curonics, which I'm going to define as direct electrical stimulation of a named nerve. In other words, like a long-term treatment. And then there's another company that I would mention called Sprint. And Sprint is a 60-day placement of the device, getting temporary stimulation and getting longer-term stimulation thereafter. So when you have a patient that you want to do something for a peripheral stimulator approach, think about what your goals are. Are they long-term? Are they short-term? Do you want to go for maybe just, if you think you can just turn off that CRPS and they'll be fine, maybe the short-term option works. But if you have a patient that you think is going to need long-term care, that I think going with one of the more direct approaches like the Nalu or the now named Curonics company is better. There's a whole bunch of products being developed by Medtronic, Boston Sci, Abbott, Nevro, Saluda, Biotronic. So there's going to be a lot of options, just like there's a lot of SI fusion options we're going to talk about. So your job is to figure out what is the one you feel is the best for your patients, what has the best reproducible results, what can you place accurately and effectively, and with the most minimal amount of complications. So we do have Nalu here to present their product. Each of these products does, like I said, have an external device that's involved that as a patient has to work with you to be able to get the stimulation they're looking for, but it's a lot less invasive to most people than putting a battery into their back. So something to keep in mind. They're basically, when it comes down to it, it's a frequency-based, current-based treatment to a painful area that is going to affect that specific nerve. And there's some people out there that are advocating, promoting, doing like field stimulation, and that's not what I'm talking about here today. I'm talking about having a nerve, naming the nerve, and going and stimulating the nerve. And I will, with that, leave this for any questions you might have. I just wanted to do a quick overview of the peripheral nerve products. I do believe, just like the disc is hot, I believe peripheral nerve stimulators are getting very hot right now as well. And the reason is patients are asking for these. They're asking for a less invasive approach for their chronic pain that's not taking a pill or, a patch. What do you want to say?
Just a comment about the coding, because the coding just finished up, the CPT advisor just finished up last week. So it comes down to one part or two part. What Dr. Siebens was mentioning is the difference between Curonics, Nalu, and then SPR, Bioness, some of the other ones. That's a one-part system. And anytime you have a receiver or a battery, that's a two-part system. I say that because the codes are different for each.
Right.
You can be used. These can be used similarly, but the one-part systems are temporary systems. They can be placed for a certain period of time and then removed. The two-parters are typically, these are general terms because there's more than just this. There's gastric stim and bladder stimulation, stuff that we don't really get into a lot, but the two-part systems are a different separate code. So, and these are designed to be placed permanently.
So the code for the two parts are 64555, correct, Doug?
Yes.
And then what's the code for the one part?
So I don't know off the top of my head. I
Okay.
don't really use one part.
Okay, me either.
So,
Okay,
yeah.
so I guess we both use two parts. Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
So with this as well as the intradiscal therapy, I'm very excited about both. Real trouble getting it approved by insurers, obviously. So is some of this, just restricted to that Medicare population, Medicare A and B, or is it more of a cash pay? How do you guys integrate this in your practice?
I think you kind of there's a trick when a disruptive technology comes to the space. What you want to do is you want to get a lot of different requests for that code going to the insurance providers, going to the Medicare providers, depending on your communities you live in. And so we always recommend going through those. I will tell you in my area, like United Healthcare has been a no-go for me from the start, but Blue Cross has been pretty reliably going through. Medicare, of course, goes through. Cigna, Aetna, kind of hit and miss. But you may have to do some peer-to-peers for this. But I think you can easily take some of the terms I just told you and some of the recommendations to have talking points during those peer-to-peer calls. I think it's getting more and more accepted. For sure in Texas, it's getting more accepted by all the carriers other than United. What about Oklahoma?
Yeah, so just, pursuant to what you're talking about, intradiscal stuff. So these things get a Category 3 code. I'm going to address this and talk later. Then you get a Category 1 code. This is Medicare, and it's usually adopted by all the 7 MACs, and they're independent, but they have some differences. They are each independent MACs. Then you start lobbying the commercials for payment. The commercial insurances, typically you'll start with some of the bigger ones, United Healthcare, the Blue Cross. And you can think of basivertebral nerve ablation as something. So the Category 1 code was developed quite a while ago. It was reimbursed, and then sequentially we start getting commercial reimbursements. Had a call last Tuesday with Blue Cross, Blue Shield, HCSC, which encompasses parts of Oklahoma, Texas, Illinois. It's a big carrier, so they're one of the 15% holdouts. And then you collect evidence, and you use the evidence to your advantage to get them to pay for it. And here's an example of it. So basivertebral nerve ablation is at the end of this. And these other devices, intradiscal augmentation, cellular therapy, that's at the very beginning of this. PNS is kind of in the middle. And so my closing pitch to Blue Cross is, as compared to fusion, which is the only viable option, basivertebral nerve ablation is 2.5 times better. It's 5 times cheaper. There's no incision. There's no downstream adjacent segment disease requiring additional surgery. There's little to no recovery, and there's no reason to do fusion before you would do this. And that's a pretty good pitch, I think. But we know that based on the data that we collected. And so we'll continue to collect the data from PNS, intradiscal substances, and we'll try to do the right thing and make the case. And if we do the right thing and it really is beneficial for the patient, the data will reflect that, and the commercial coverage will follow.
I do think your cash pay idea, though, is something to keep in mind. Almost everything I do, I have a cash pay price for. And you might think to yourself, this is a lot of money. and I don't even want to throw it out there. But what I have found is the patients that are desperate or looking for something that they've not been offered before, they will find the money if it's something they want to try. I always try to put it through for them initially and do their peer-to-peer, but if I should lose, then we offer them a cash price. And you'd be surprised how many people, I mean, I had a guy do a stimulator the other day. I think he pulled his credit card out for his trial, and then another credit card out for his perm, and it was a total of like 75 grand. And I don't know what the guy did for a living, but I know he flies back and forth to Mexico a lot with small planes. But the fact is, I don't need to know what he does. I just know that cash pay is an option.
Keep in mind, you can offer cash pay only if you're not in contract with that insurance to do that procedure. If you are, you have to honor your contract with the insurance. If they don't cover it, then cash pay is fine.
Bingo. That's a great point.
We did a cardiothoracic surgeon for an SI joint ablation.
Uh-huh.
Because the insurance wouldn't cover it.
Yep.
So that's not along the same ideas.
Yep.
Then it's open for you to do that.
Did you have a question back there? Yeah.
Chad, personally, just like from your experience with it, like part of the algorithm, do you ever do a nerve block first, or do you ever try the SPR first trial before jumping into like the novel, or do you just sometimes say, hey,
That is a method some people do. I do a nerve block. I don't do an SPR first. But I think that most of us, like if say it's a cluneal nerve I'm going to do, I first take a needle, walk it along the iliac crest and drag it back and do kind of a track anesthetizing. And if that makes a difference, then I put a trial lead in. So I typically want to give the patient the best outcomes they can have. And that reminds me, lateral femoral cutaneous nerve, we talked about this last night. That is a great indication for this. I've had really good results with that, whereas nothing else has been consistent. So keep that in mind. There's a lot of different nerves you can name throughout the body. That's a good one. Dr. Gandhi, are you getting close to ready in the OR? No. I can see you're not. So we can continue with questions for just a second here. Yes.
Do you find often that sometimes the nerve block doesn't necessarily predict success with the humanist implant?
I mean, so
It comes back to
if I'm pretty dead set on it, I would probably still do a lead trial. In pain, we have gotten used to promoting, like you do medial branch blocks for doing ablation, right? And so the procedures that make us have the most sphincter factor are the procedures that have no precursor, right? The basivertebral nerve ablation that we'll talk about. There's no precursor procedure, so you kind of go, there's modic changes, there looks to be a problem with, the end plates, so let's go do that and hope it works. And so, but we feel more comfortable if we do a stem trial, the person has 95% improvement, their life changes for a week, and then we know a perm's probably gonna work for them. So I just am kind of the opinion that I always wanna try to give people a test drive before they buy the car. And to your point, if they have a nerve block that maybe doesn't give them results we expect, but my suspicion is still strong, I'll go ahead and do a trial with the lead. Good point. Any other questions? Yes.
when you're doing like testing the procedure, are you really trying to cover the area? Because or sometimes do you feel like you just don't get free coverage during the procedure, and that's okay when you're testing?
When I'm doing a nerve block,
Or the actual like with spread, we get all that stuff. When I've done it, we try to test. Sometimes we get good coverage.
oh, you mean like intraoperatively? Yeah, I think that it's more, the reps can speak to this, but if you're a certain distance away from the nerve and it looks good radiographically, or especially if you have an ultrasound, I don't worry so much about what they get intraoperatively. We're ready over there? Great questions. We'll hold the other questions for now. Dr. Gandhi, if you want.